Good morning, and thank you to Jacques for the introduction. So my name is Jean-Christophe Gariel, and I am working at the Institute for Radio Protection and Nuclear Safety in France. And before starting my talk, I would like to be back to the title, which is the role of experts. I think it's a very important point for people that work in national institutes. Why is it important? It's important because we can suspect that in case of a large nuclear accident, the trust will disappear immediately for all the people that are belonging to authorities and also for people that belong to national institutes. Why? Because if there is a nuclear accident, there is a fault somewhere, there is a fault in nuclear safety, and there is a fault from the government and from the National Institute. So that's a question that we have at IRSN and which is very important for us. What would happen to us as experts in case of nuclear emergency? If in the situation of emergency, we will have to perform evaluation and assessment for authorities, at that time we will not ask us a lot of questions. But a few days after, questions from the population will come. We will have a problem with the trust, with no trust from the population, and that's why we were very interested by working on this question of the role of experts in the situation of post-accidental recovery. So, first of all, let's go a little bit back. IRSN and CEPN, which is also a French organization, have been involved in the past in several European projects called Ethos and Core. This project took place in Belarus just after the Chernobyl accident. During this project, experts from these two organizations went there and put their competencies at the service of the population. And the main lesson of this involvement was that the fact of involving the population with the support of national and local authorities and experts was a key point to ensure the effectiveness and the sustainability of protection actions. So the involvement of the population was really the key point. Then in 2011, Fukushima accident occurred, and ICRP took the decision to organize what was called ICRP dialogues, and at that time, IRSN and CEPN think that it was a good opportunity to be involved in these seminars. First of all, in order to bring testimony on the works that have been performed with the population in Belarus, just after Chernobyl accident, and also to learn from the experience in Fukushima. So probably most of you know that about 12 dialogues were organized between 2011 and 2015. What were the aims of this dialogue? It was to identify the problems and the challenges of the rehabilitation of living conditions in the affected territories. During this dialogue, it was not a dialogue between population and experts. Experts were there, but it was mainly a dialogue among people locally involved. And most of the experts that were participating were listening to this dialogue, and that was the case for IRSN and CEPN experts. During this dialogue, several topics were discussed, such as foodstuff controls, the role of radioactive measurements, the question of education, the question of health, the question of value of culture. So that were very rich meetings that took place generally during the weekend on Saturday and Sunday, and there were between 3 and 4 dialogues each year between 2011 and 2015. So the main question, and that's what I said as an introduction, was if an accident would occur in France or in Europe, how can we as experts, prepare ourselves to work with the population? So we started the analysis in 2013 to identify the main lessons which could be learned from these dialogues and that could benefit to radio protection experts. Obviously, all this work was done in cooperation with Japanese stakeholders and all the experts locally involved in the dialogue in Japan through several workshops. I should say that I attended for the first time the second or third dialogues, and for me it was a real shock. I was moving from a situation where I was an expert discussing about numbers, about doses, about becquerels, and I moved to another world with the real world, the reality. You are facing people that are affected by a nuclear accident. And clearly, for me, it was a very, very rich experience with a lot of emotion. I'm going to present you the major findings of this study that we performed with CEPN. And these major findings focus on 4 main topics. The first one, which seems obvious, but I think it's not so obvious when you are there, is the human dimension of the post-accident situation. The second one is the process about stakeholders' engagement. By stakeholders, I mean authorities, public, and also experts. That's the main topic of my talk. The third one is a prolongation of the previous one, is about the co-expertise process. As an expert, we are used to perform expertise, to perform evaluation, assessment. And in that case, in that kind of situation, what we have learned is that what is important is to have what we call co-expertise process, I mean process of expertise with affected people. And the fourth one, which is also a conclusion of the third point, is what we call the development of a practical radiological protection culture. So let's start with what we call the human dimensions. If we compare the experience in Belarus after Chernobyl accident and what we have observed after Fukushima accident, we can see that the human consequences are quite similar. The first point that we observe, and it's again very obvious, is a strong worry about health, and especially about children's health. There were a lot of questions of mothers that worried a lot about the health of their children. And this will have a consequence on the fact of being back or not on the contaminated territories. But this worry about health was not the only concern. From a more general point of view, the eruption of radioactivity is a rupture for the population, which deeply upsets the relationship of man to himself, to others, and with his environment. So people feel that they are living a total loss of control on the day-to-day life. Another point that I already mentioned, and again it's obvious, there is a total loss of confidence in authorities and experts. If there is an accident, there is a failure somewhere, a fault somewhere, and the main cause comes from problems with authorities and problems with experts. And a consequence is a feeling of helplessness and abandonment of the affected people, and also, and it has been observed in Japan, a general feeling of discrimination and exclusion. You have people that have been affected, and you have people that have not been affected. And finally, all these feelings finish with a central key issues that has to be addressed by each inhabitant. Should I continue to live in the affected territories, or should I leave them? Or if I left, should I return or not at home for if I am an evacuee? So these are the two main questions that we were discussing, and it was a key point during all these dialogues. Second point about the stakeholder engagement, talking about authorities, public and expert. What was observed in Belarus is that the stakeholder involvement was mainly driven by the expert from abroad. It was a bit different in Japan, where local authorities and local communities mobilize themselves to initiate actions with the help of experts, and it's very important, that were personally committed. There were very few experts coming from national organizations. These experts were personally committed by the local community, were coming from academic world, or were people retired, or people like that. So we had a lot of discussion with the Japanese stakeholders and with these experts that were personally committed. And the main feedback from these experts are the following. The major difficulty, and we all know that, is to talk about the effect and risks that are associated with exposure to ionizing radiation. It's not possible to say it's good or it's not good, it's safe or it's not safe, and we all know that. And the main point was that we should not easily conclude that the situation is safe. That's not the main point. We have to listen the question from the people, and people have to reach their own conclusion. And also, we have to be experts, have to be consistent with the scientific knowledge. We all know that for chronic exposure at low dose, there are a lot of uncertainties. There are limits in the knowledge, and experts should be modest with respect to these uncertainties and these limits of knowledge. Another point which is very important is that we are, as an expert, we are going to talk about radio protection, about numbers, about dose. But we should realize that if it's unavoidable to talk about radio protection, it cannot handle people's lives. And also there is a very important point, which is to focus on individual data, not talking from a general point of view. It's important to consider individually the situation of each people. And last point, it's very important to respect the values and choices of each person. It's not to the expert to say you should return to your home or you should not. The role of the expert is to listen the question from the affected population and to give elements that would allow all the affected people to make their own choices and their own opinion. Just an example of this kind of small meetings that took place in Fukushima region, in Suetsegi, it's a city south of Fukushima power plant. And you see that it's a small number of people that were discussing with some local experts, individually committed. It's not a big assembly with 500 people and one expert coming from Tokyo for 2 or 3 hours. These experts are spending time, several days, and for some of them, they are living with the people in the affected area, and it's a very important point. Third point, which is a direct conclusion about the involvement of stakeholders, is the development of the practical radiological protection culture. Fukushima experience has confirmed what was observed in Belarus, and it's that the co-expertise process is very effective to develop a practical radiological protection culture among the affected people. And through this radiological protection culture, people will be able to interpret results of measurements. There was a very interesting presentation this morning, just before the break, that shows the interest of individual measurements. So it's important to have a co-expertise, a co-assessment, experts and population about ambient levels, external and internal doses, and contamination of products. I'm sure that now some people that at the time of the Fukushima accident didn't know about radioactivity measurement now became specialists about radioactive measurement, and it's a very effective point for affected people. That's also an opportunity to build our own benchmarks against radioactivity in day-to-day life. You can decide, because you like to go in forest, to spend a few minutes or some time in forest because you like to walk in forest, and you have the opportunity to control your radioactivity and to balance your choice. I will go to the forest. I know that I will take some more doses, but if I integrate on a long period of time, it's okay. And final point, it's allowed to make our own his own decision and to protect himself and loved one. So it's the start of what we can mention as a self-help protection. So in this approach, and it has been demonstrated by several presentations, the access to individual measurements by the people with suitable devices, I mean simple devices where data can be interpreted easily, is a critical point, and I think we will discuss this point. So just to illustrate that, again, a small meeting with experts that are discussing about measurements that were performed by citizens in Suetsegi, so that's the occasion of sharing knowledge, of sharing measurements, and an opportunity to have his own opinion and to be able to make choices. So some tentative summary and challenges. From our point of view, the co-expertise process is really a key point to regain trust, or I would say some trust, between authorities, experts, and inhabitants. But experts have to behave carefully. They should not come and talk about sciences, numbers, etc. They should be at the service of the population, to listen to the question, and to provide elements in order for the population to be able to make choices. To be helpful, scientists need to understand that as necessary as radiation protection is, it's not the only problem that the population is facing, and it cannot handle people's lives. It's sure that during an accident you have a radiological point of view, but there are many other problems that occurred, and it's only one part, even if it's the cause of all the problems. And last point, which is very important, the expert must be at the service, and he should not work for, he is at the service of individuals and of the community. It must help them to make their own choice. So a last question, but does helping people protecting themselves mean that authorities or experts have no responsibilities? So a last slide just to try to understand this question. What are the responsibilities, or which responsibilities for authorities or experts after a nuclear accident? The authorities are responsible to quickly implement a level above which it's not authorized to reside permanently, and to adopt different criteria to guide actions that will take into account the prevailing circumstances. For example, food contamination levels or evacuation levels. A second point, very important, authorities and experts must ensure radiation monitoring and health surveillance of the population. And we had the opportunity to see this point in previous presentation. And authorities and experts have the duty to accompany and support all affected people in their local projects to restore decent spiritual, moral, and material living conditions. And for that, and that was the experience of the ICRP dialogues, they have to support the establishment of places for dialogues. When you have dialogues, you don't feel isolated, and it's very important when you are affected by a nuclear accident. Then it will contribute to a joint assessment of the radiological situation. It's not just an assessment that is performed by authorities or by experts. It's a co-expertise of the radiological situation. And final point, it will help the development of radiation protection cultures that will be a key point for people to recover quasi-normal conditions of life. Thank you very much.